Hi guys, today I wanted to review a website that I use frequently, both as a language learner and more recently I was able to experiment with it as a teacher. The website is Italki. I've been using it on-off for at least 5 or 6 years now, and it's proven very popular with all those that I've recommended it to as well. It's a great gift idea. I gave a gift card of some language learning credits to my dad, and that proved very popular. He's been learning French for a few years now and seems to be progressing nicely. And my girlfriend's mother is a huge fan, devotee no less, of Italki in her English lessons. So I'll start by reviewing the way the website works from a user perspective, and then I'll look at my recent experiences from a teaching standpoint. So, as a user, what do I like about Italki? Well, it's very easy to operate first and foremost. You can simply sort by price and choose the best option for you in terms of what you want from a teacher. Perhaps you're at a reasonably high level and you simply want to practice the language and work on conversation. Well, that's great because you can choose what's called a community tutor. These are typically native speakers, albeit linguists from other countries can also offer to teach languages. More on that later when we review the teaching aspect. But community tutors can be a relatively inexpensive option because these are individuals with no formal teaching qualifications. As a result, they're not allowed by the website to charge exorbitant rates. And on the other hand, you have the professional teachers, and that's if you're looking for a slightly more structured, more formal lessons. I would suggest they really come into their own in that perspective if you want to get into the nitty-gritty of different grammar structures perhaps, or things that are causing you particular problems. I tend to work with the community tutors. I'm based in Italy, but I always want to practice my French and Portuguese as often as I can, which is why I schedule regular lessons or conversation classes with people of my choosing. It's a little bit counterintuitive in that I find you have to regularly change your conversation partner. I find the topics tend to become a bit stale and counterintuitive in the sense that the greater rapport you build up with that conversation partner, often they become less inclined or more reluctant to correct you, perhaps because they're a little bit worried about offending you. But ideally you want someone who's there, who's able to really drive that conversation, to give you different things to talk about and correct you in the right way, in a timely fashion, I would suggest. You never want your flow to be interrupted, but it's good that you can have them perhaps write down a few notes in the Skype chat, for instance. That's something I'll address later on in terms of the way the lessons work when I come onto the teaching side. But coming back to it, community tutor or professional language teacher, those are the two different options, and you've got everything to suit your budget needs. That's because Italki, you buy credits which are expressed in US dollars, and then those credits correspond to the price that the teacher sets. And because it's US dollars and because of the exchange rate and because there are teachers all over the world, these rates can be very competitive because perhaps the cost of living and the exchange rate against the dollar is very good in certain parts of the world. I was able to do conversation recently with a Portuguese gentleman who's based in Brasilia because he married a Brazilian woman, and he was telling me that he makes a very good salary from Italki relative to the cost of living. It also works out very well for me because in terms of what I pay at an hourly rate, that's very competitive in terms of the prices I would encounter in Milan where I'm based. So the only drawback I would suggest with regards to being a user on Italki is perhaps the fact that you have to regularly change your conversation partner. Certainly that's been my experience. I haven't really been able to sustain a conversation partner for more than a few months without slightly getting itchy feet, but perhaps that's down to me. And I would say the biggest plus of this is the fact that you can often actually choose people from specific parts of the world. If you're working or you're learning foreign languages which are particularly prevalent in all 4 corners of the globe, then this can be very good. Maybe you really struggle to understand French Canadians, well, you can go and specifically choose someone that's based in Quebec and you can get very used to the way they speak. I recently did some Portuguese with a guy from Mozambique, and that was certainly an eye-opening experience because it just tuned my ear into slightly different sounds compared to the ones that that I'm used to, or that I was used to when I was living in Lisbon. So that is, from a user perspective, very easy to use. You simply load up the credits via a credit card payment, and then you can away you go. You can buy single lessons, you can buy package lessons, which brings down the price a bit as you're buying in bulk, and you simply have to review the teacher after every lesson, and they also review you as a student. Now I'm going to look at Italki from a teacher's perspective. I'd love to say that I decided to embark on this adventure as a teacher on Italki for the purpose of creating a YouTube video. That would be disingenuous. It was actually in the throes of me being a bit neurotic during peak lockdown here, when you start to wonder as to whether you'll ever work again. A fairly easy onboarding process, I have to say. I had some experience teaching English in the past in a private language school in the south of Italy more than a decade ago, and then the following year in 3 primary schools as a language assistant via the British Council. That was in France. So I had taught English before. However, despite the fact I do have a relatively low-level TEFL qualification, I don't have the CELTA license, I wasn't able to qualify for the professional language teacher status on the basis that you need to actually upload scans of documents. Any documentation I have on that score is all at my mother's house in Winchester, and naturally no way of accessing that during lockdown. So I had to be a community tutor. The onboarding process was relatively seamless. It involved a video tutorial with representatives from Italki, with a number of different teachers or tutors that were joining in those particular days. They took us through the do's and don'ts of the website, and also the policy in terms of not really expressing any religious or political affiliation with your students. That's supposed to be off topic, which is quite difficult at this current moment in time, I would suggest. And then afterwards you had to fill out a multiple choice quiz, and you had to score above a certain level to prove that you had taken on board all of the information. As I was a community language tutor, initially you're not very competitive on the market. It's like the laws of any market, really, any market dynamics. So to be competitive, you have to bring down your prices, you have to offer trial lessons of 30 minutes, and that can be quite frustrating, I have to say, because Italki takes a 15% commission of any price you set for the lessons. So if you're then having to undercharge as well, simply to get numbers up, to be able to have reviews coming in and positive feedback and get your star rating, which varies from 0 to 5 up, it can be very taxing in the early weeks. You don't tend to earn much money. I nevertheless did that for a week before raising my prices, and what I noticed was huge demand when my prices were low, naturally, and then all of those students who had been so keen after my first lesson fell by the wayside. Admittedly, I didn't warn them that I was going to hike my prices up. Perhaps I should have done that, but there you go. As I said, it was a means to an end. It was a way of filling my day. I was also able to meet some very interesting people. I taught someone in Poland. I taught a lot of Italians. I taught people in China and Hong Kong, which is great. The Italki lessons are run via 2 possible forums, shall we say. Skype on the one hand, or Italki's own platform on the other, their virtual classroom. Both relatively easy to use. There's the chat option as well, where you can write down any vocabulary. One of my teachers, when I was doing Portuguese, was very good at sharing his screen, and then he used a Word document as a sort of virtual whiteboard. I found that particularly useful. I prepared some cartoons to spark debate, spark topics of conversation. I wrote a few graded articles as well. That was the extent of my preparation for the lessons, because as a community tutor, the rates that you're getting, it's quite hard to justify doing too much prep in terms of that. But between the 15% commission and then the fee that you have to pay at the end, because there's a conversion charge when it comes to the fact that you're paid in US dollars, I obviously am based in Italy, I earn in euros, and the fact that then there's also a PayPal processing fee. It all means that Italki as a teacher is not necessarily the most convenient way of earning money, I would suggest. I'm sure it can be lucrative if you are willing to put a lot of time into it. I wasn't, certainly not having those really low bargain basement rates for a number of weeks. But as and when you get your regular students and you communicate with them and are able to raise those prices gradually, I think you can fill out your timetable, and naturally it's hugely convenient. You can do lessons at any time of the day, you can give as much availability as you want, all from the comfort of your own home. I love Italki as a student, as a teacher less so, although I must say it's a little bit ironic because there's also the option of just having a conversation partner on Italki with no money changing hands. You get messages from other users who see that you're learning certain languages and they say, oh, do you want to be a conversation partner? I'd always resisted this option. I was quite happy to pay for Portuguese or French conversation, and I didn't necessarily want to then have to dedicate a portion of my time to doing English. My choice, I was happy to pay, and yet ironically the credits that I earned giving those nominal amount of English lessons, I probably did 12 to 15 in the end, I'm now using as credits for my own Portuguese tuition to avoid all of those processing fees that I mentioned earlier on. One other critique I would have is a slightly negative comment about the entire process that is involved with Italki as a teacher is on your introductory video, you have to speak in any languages that you speak to a minimum, I believe, of C1 or C2 level, once again following that common European framework reference for languages. And I thought that was a little bit artificial, to be honest. It was a case of you could almost script something, and I didn't see how my credentials in French and Italian, which I was obliged to speak in that video, I didn't see the relevance really of doing that. And you could script everything, you could just simply parrot something in those languages. Not dissimilar to the videos you see of the self-styled polyglot community. I'll do a video on them on another day. All things considered, if you're looking to learn a language, if you want to do conversation and you don't want to pay for an expensive course, I like the freedom and flexibility that Italki offers. Am I ruling out giving any English classes in the future? Possibly not. It could be particularly useful in quieter areas or quieter times of the year. But all things considered, a great website. If you haven't already, check it out. If you haven't already, comment on this video, subscribe, notification bell, all that jazz. I'll see you on the next one. Cheers.